Hello and welcome to the channel. So I've recently made a big mistake with one of my watch purchases recently. Here's what happened. So I'd recently started a new job and wanted to keep two time zones. Now, before you ask, at first I did use my phone and the computer to track the UK time and Eastern European time, and sometimes the time in New York. But it just didn't stick. When the clocks are out of sight, they're out of mind, and you start thinking about local time. I could have maybe just used my math and just counted backwards or forwards the amount of hours, but where's the fun in that? I wanted to buy a new watch. I started to look at GMTs that I liked, but I didn't want to go overboard and break the bank. So instead, I stumbled across 12-hour bezels. But this is where I hit my first problem. I soon found that 12-hour bezels actually aren't that common. There were some 12-hour bezel watches that I really liked, but they wasn't available. And the ones that were available were either too big or I just didn't like them. But I wanted something and I wanted to scratch that itch. And that was my second mistake. I stumbled across Nodus and started to look at a lot of reviews on YouTube. There were lots of reviews around Nodus watches, but something I did notice was all the reviews took place at the same time, and that should have been a red flag. While there was lots of reviews, there was little in the way of long-term reviews. And again, that red flag is something I should have paid attention to, but didn't. So instead, I decided to pull the trigger. I jumped on Chrono24, found a watch based in the USA, and bought it. No haggling, I just wanted the watch. So the seller shipped it over and all seemed okay. But here was the other problem. On closer inspection, the watch seemed in good order, but something was a bit off. Now, I have some IWCs and some Seikos, and there's something about the texture and the type of steel on this Nodus that seemed a bit off. I would say there's something about the luster, the weight, it just didn't feel substantial. It didn't feel like the steel in the other watches, whether they be IWCs or Seiko. So I decided to put those reservations aside, put the watch on a NATO strap and started to wear it. The good news, well, the watch worked really well and I really like the 12-hour bezel. I then stopped wearing the NATO strap because it was very uncomfortable and instead put it on a rubber strap I got from Amazon. I have reviews of both the rubber strap and the NATO strap that I don't recommend you buy coming up in videos really soon. There were four main issues. Even though I was wearing a more comfortable strap and I stopped wearing the NATO strap, which was uncomfortable, there were a few problems. The first was around the quality of the watch. The metal seemed a bit off. It didn't compare favorably to my Seiko or IWC watches, which admittedly are more expensive. The steel feels a bit lighter and the finishing, while looks good, there's something amiss around the craft of the watch and the quality of the watch. It might look good in photos, but that look doesn't hold up in person. The second issue was the very small crown. It doesn't allow you to grip it properly and it has this sandpaper feel around it rather than actual grooves or proper knurling so you could grip the crown to change the time or the date. This was a small issue at first and it only became a big issue later on. Then after 2 months, the third and fourth issue. So the third issue was the crown. It's an absolute disaster. Usually on watches, when you unscrew the crown, you get a satisfying click to show which position you're in to set the watch. A click to set the time and a click to set the date function. And as you can see with this watch, when you pull out the crown, it feels like chewing gum all the way out and there are no physical steps to show you whether you're in the clock setting position or the date setting position. At £300, I would be expecting more or equal quality to a Seiko. I can't see any reason why a £300 watch wouldn't have a crown where it has clear steps as to which function you're in. I would actually go as far as to say is this feels worse than a £20 watch. And actually, I've never felt a cheap or a cheap £20 watch feel as bad as this. Then there's the really, really, really big issue. So if you thought the crown was bad, here's the next one. My primary reason for buying this watch was to be able to set a second time zone really quickly without fiddling with, let's say, a GMT function watch. Well, take a look at this. The bezel no longer turns. It no longer has the clicks and it cannot budge. No matter how much pressure I put on turning the bezel, it just doesn't budge. It's incredible how strong it's locked in. And I've never in my life heard of a situation where a bezel actually stops moving and is unable to move around freely. So now I have a watch that doesn't fulfill the function that it should, and for some reason the bezel is bunged up. So what's going on here? Firstly, I haven't got a clue. And I will say that my purchases from Chrono24, and I have 3 in total, have all been bad for some reason. Maybe it's bad luck, but I'll just outline quickly. The last 2 purchases were IWC watches, and the one in the middle, or purchase number 2, I asked all the right questions of the dealer, and he said the movement had been serviced, and actually the movement wasn't serviced, and when I received it, it was quite wobbly, so I actually have to incur a servicing charge for that watch. I would say this is the first watch I've bought from Chrono24 from a private seller, and I asked again all the right questions. The seller seemed pretty nice, but overall it's been a crap purchase, and after 2 months I'm totally not happy with this watch. So what will I do next? Well, I'm not sure, but I want to address something around microbrands. Not all microbrands are created equal. Some microbrands are probably amazing with great quality control. But then there are the rest. If you end up making a bad purchase, you'll be the one holding the bag of a bad watch. My advice after all this: buying second-hand is a huge risk, and this one definitely was. My advice on microbrands is to be very, very careful. There's something of a pattern that I've noticed with microbrands, something that I mentioned earlier. The pattern includes a launch or release of a microbrand model. Then you'll start to see social media buzz around the release of that watch, which is then reviewed by certain reviewers who have watch channels. The reviews of the watch model is always positive and always includes this particular saying: look at the finishing on this watch. This saying doesn't tell the full story. Particular attention may be paid to the finishing of a watch, but how does it actually look and feel up close? That's something you can never do through a video or a photo. And actually, that's the full picture of the story. So the finishing isn't always a sign of quality. Another thing I've noticed is the reviews all happen at the same time, during or prior to the launch. Then you never or rarely see reviews or ongoing videos about that watch again. So what happened? Watches people really, really like take their time to make videos that go beyond the review and regularly wearing the watch. There are rarely long-term reviews on these microbrand watches. So that begs the question: how good were these watches? And was it all just marketing? There are many microbrands out there that people love, and those microbrands make great watches. But there are also microbrands that launch a watch, sell out of their watches maybe, and you'll never hear from those brands again, or you only hear about them until they launch their next watch. So between all of those microbrands, how do you know which one is good? Which models are great? Which ones have good quality control? that's difficult to understand if you're new to the watch hobby and excited about lots of watches and marketing of watches out there. Because of this, if you're a novice collector like me, I would actually recommend one of a few things. Stick to Seiko, or maybe Longines, or maybe Christopher Ward. That could be a good way to go. A lot of people talk fondly about the quality of those watches and the build quality of Christopher Ward watches. It is direct to customer, but maybe there's more of a relationship there. So maybe stick to some of these really well-known, tried and true brands. Also, going to the store or going to a pre-owned store might be a better way to purchase watches. Over the last few years, for obvious reasons, a lot of us have been buying online and have probably brought purchases which were better suited to buying in person. My belief now is buying online is a bit troubling, and buying a micro brand is tricky if you don't understand or know the quality of the micro brand, and especially buying secondhand online could be a huge risk. And I've definitely had issues purchasing from Chrono24. So yeah, for novice buyers out there, be careful.